The Moscow theatre siege is probably one of the most insane, yet outside-the-box thinking anti-terror operations in history. It began on the 23rd of October 2002 at 21:45 hours, when a white bus carrying 53 heavily armed and well-trained Chechen terrorists entered the Moscow theatre and quickly seized the lobby. They immediately changed from their civilian clothes to military fatigues, and then stormed the main theatre and began firing into the air and shouting commands. Unfortunately for the audience, the play Nordost, which was set in World War II, which meant many didn't even realise this was a hostage situation and they thought it was part of the performance. Once it became apparent that this was not part of the play, the civilians surrendered and 979 hostages were then taken. Now with the theatre under their control, the Chechens began wiring explosive traps around the building, and 18 of the female Chechens declared they were wearing explosive vests and would detonate these if the Russian forces attempted any breach of the theatre. At 2300 hours, the Chechens released their demands, which were the immediate withdrawal of all Russian forces from Chechen territory, at which point this statement was released by the Chechen leader of the group. Each one of us is willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of God and the independence of Chechnya. I swear by God that we are more keen on dying than you are on living. After the statement, 200 hostages were released, these comprising of women, children, and Chechen and Georgian nationals. Day 2 began, and another 20 hostages were released after Chechen politicians were able to talk to the terrorists, and the Russians then declared they would not assault the theatre if no hostages were harmed. But the Chechens had other ideas. A policeman was shot who they claimed was drunk and tried to enter the theatre, but this has never been confirmed. But fortunately, a silver lining came as all foreign nationals were allowed to be released. The Russians then offered free passage to the Chechens to a neutral country if they released all the hostages, but this was rejected, and the Chechens declared that they would kill 10 hostages an hour if their demands were not met. The situation was getting out of control, and tensions had started to rise, but then 5 more hostages were released, but only an hour later gunshots began from inside. People began to panic, but this turned out to be just intimidation of the hostages and not the beginning of the execution. At the start of day 3, more hostages were released, around 20, and the rest of the foreign nationals were also freed. But the Chechens were growing impatient, and also the Russian Spetsnaz, their elite special forces, were growing very impatient with politicians and were already planning to storm the theatre, as they did not want these terrorists to get away. So when day 4 arrived, the situation escalated when supposedly a hostage charged a female terrorist who was guarding a large bomb and attacked her, at which point the Chechens fired and killed 2 hostages. Whatever actually happened doesn't matter now, as Russian forces got the news of the 2 dead hostages, and the plan to breach the theatre was given the go-ahead. Things were about to get messy. The assault began at 5:30 am with Russian forces pumping gas into the theatre ventilation system in an attempt to knock out all occupants of the theatre. This alerted the terrorists and hostages, and screams of gas, gas, gas were heard. Then 3 Spetsnaz assault teams began their approach on the theatre, with one taking overwatch positions and the other 2 moving into a gay nightclub called Central Station, which shared a wall with the theatre. They then breached a set of iron doors and advanced into the theatre complex. As the teams entered, gunfire was heard, most likely still conscious terrorists firing back at the Spetsnaz, as they mainly used silent weaponry in the assault. The main leaders of the terrorists were killed in an upstairs kitchen almost immediately, and as the assault began advancing further, gunfights raged in multiple corridors as they advanced towards the main hall. As they breached the main hall, the priority was to evacuate hostages and quickly disable the explosives planted around the theatre so they could not be detonated and kill everyone inside. As they got the hostages out as quickly as possible, 3 rebels surrendered, and a 4th was attempted to blend into the crowd was also caught, and by 7 am all hostages had been evacuated, and all terrorists were killed or captured. But the gas had taken its toll on terrorists and hostages alike, and many civilians were suffering from gas poisoning. The gas is rumoured to have been a vaporized derivative of fentanyl, the drug currently ravaging the United States, and it is a very powerful and highly addictive painkiller. And to compound these problems, the Spetsnaz did not inform medical personnel that they would be using gas, and to this day will not reveal what gas was used, meaning medical personnel did not know exactly how to treat those affected, leading to the death of 126 hostages from gas poisoning, where only 2 were actually directly killed by terrorist actions. The Moscow theatre siege shows that thinking outside the box can be highly effective, but without proper coordination with all aspects of your team can result in even greater casualties than the initial threat, and this event, to this day, is a stain on the Spetsnaz reputation and has dissuaded the use of gas in counter-terrorist operations as it is seen as risky and hard to judge its effectiveness. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe and leave a comment. Thank you for watching everyone, and have a good night.